Hello and welcome everyone. Today's video features the recently introduced HMS Rodney, one of the most formidable British Navy battleships during the interwar period. Rodney featured a distinctive layout with her three main battery turrets concentrated on her bow. Now, this battleship had quite an eventful service history. She participated in military operations in the Atlantic, the Arctic, the North Sea and the Mediterranean during World War II. Rodney also played a major part in sinking the German battleship Bismarck in May of 1941 and significantly contributed to the success of Allied landings in Normandy in June of 1944. Now, what makes Rodney stand out from her sister ship Nelson is she comes armed with this 24.5-inch Mark I torpedo, which was carried on the Nelson class of battleships. Now, this is the type of torpedo that Rodney fired at the German battleship Bismarck, which is the only known occasion that a battleship fired torpedoes at an enemy battleship. So let's start this review guide of the Rodney by starting with her armor layout. Now, as we can clearly see here on screen, using a simple port screenshot, Rodney does have significant weaknesses armor-wise. A bow and stern section all comprised of 26mm. Her main deck and upper casemate are all 32mm. Her superstructure 16, and you can see here her belt armor comes in two different sections. Under the main turrets is 356mm, and under the superstructure gets 330mm of protection. For the turrets, they get a frontal plate of 406mm, a top plate of 184, and different side plating of 279 and 229mm respectively. And the rear plate on these turrets is quite weak, it's only 129, but not really vulnerable, as most of your guns will always be aiming forward and most of your engagements will be in this position, so you'll be utilizing pretty decent frontal armor on these turrets. But this ties into the hit points, and with this build, I just quickly put up the build on screen. You can see here the upgrades and the captain skills that I'm using. Pretty standard tank build. I have incorporated vigilance into the build, and I am using the Andrew Cunningham captain, which does give some nice additional bonuses for Royal Navy ships. So hit points 62,900, and using vigilance we get the torpedo protection up to 26%. Moving to the main battery, Rodney gets 9 of these 406mm guns. Now, these are slightly reduced in performance compared to her sister ship Nelson, but these come in 3 triple mounted gun turrets. They have a 30-second reload time. They can rotate with this build 180 degrees in 45 seconds. They have a max dispersion of 230 meters and a max firing range of 18 kilometers. Rodney, however, does benefit from the Russian mechanic of enhanced dispersion while being closer to your targets. So one is very much encouraged to close the distance and utilize the advantages of this mechanic. Now, the high explosive is slightly reduced in terms of max damage and fire chance and penetration compared to her sister ship Nelson, and the AP damage is also reduced. So the max damage on these guns is 5,950 with a 45% fire chance, and they can penetrate 68mm of armor with a shell speed of 792 meters per second. The armor piercing damage is 10,800 with a slightly slower speed, although minimal, 780 meters per second. Rodney does get some secondary battery guns, 6 single-mounted 120mm guns. These have a 4.8 second reload, a base range of 6.2 kilometers, firing high explosive with a max damage of 1700, an 8% fire chance. They can only pen 20mm of armor with a shell speed of 749 meters per second. This is augmented by having an additional 6 twin-mounted 152mm, slightly slower in reload, 11.4 seconds. They have the same max firing range, 6.2 kilometers. They can inflict a max high explosive damage of 2150, 2150, 9% fire chance. These can pen 25mm of armor, and these have a relatively fast shell velocity of 884 meters per second. So max firing range 18 kilometers and 9 406mm main battery guns. Now, what makes Rodney really stand apart from her sister ship Nelson are these massive torpedoes. You get 2 single-mounted torpedo launchers, both submerged under the waterline. They have a very fast reload time of just 40 seconds, a max firing range of 10 kilometers. They inflict a truly massive 29,367 in damage, and they have a torpedo speed of 67 knots with a detectability range of 1.7 kilometers. So these are the torpedoes normally found on the St. Vincent. Very, very high damage torpedoes at tier 7 with absolutely outstanding firing angles while going forward. Rodney also gets access to the depth charge airstrike with 2 attack flights. These have a reload time of 25 seconds, 1 aircraft per attacking flight, dropping 1 bomb with a max damage of 3400. These have an operational range of 9 kilometers. So only 1 bomb per payload, which is a little bit on the low side, but tier 7 after all. In terms of AA defense, Rodney gets a AA rating of 67. Rodney gets 61 of these single-mounted 20mm, 5 twin-mounted 20mm guns, 1 quad-mounted 40mm, 5 octuple 40mm turrets, and 1 set of the secondary battery, the 120mm. These 6 single-mounted are dual purpose. All combined, they pump out a continuous average damage of 265. Alas, she only fires 1 shell explosion per flak salvo, which has a max damage of 1323. Priority sector reinforcement is 35%, and the max firing range is 5.2 kilometers only, so relatively short firing range. In terms of maneuverability, Rodney gets a base speed of 23.8 knots. This is improved to 25 when using the Sierra Mike signal flag, and Rodney also comes armed with the engine boost consumable, and this does give a 15% increase in max speed. Now, should you use brisk and engine boost, one can get the Rodney up to just around 31 knots when undetected using this engine boost. So finally, stats wise, Rodney gets a concealment rating of 48, a detectability range by enemy ships at 13.4 kilometers. She will be detected by enemy submarines and aircraft at 8.9 kilometers. So this is the Rodney. HMS Rodney is finally in the game, and I guess it will prove to be quite popular with the YOLO brigade out there. She does have significant weaknesses in terms of her armor that can be abused when shooting her bow and stern. But that being said, there are plenty of opportunities in the game these days to make use of these torpedoes, and she can be a lot of fun in some situations. So I hope you enjoyed this little review guide of the HMS Rodney. If you'd like to see some live gameplay, feel free to come over and visit me on Twitch. You can see the link here on screen. I look forward to seeing you all.